everyone. It's very gratifying to see everybody here. I'm concerned about this issue of writing lecture recital proposals. It's really one of the hardest things, one of the hardest elements in the whole program. There are not many examples of lecture recitals, in that faculty don't generally give lecture recitals. Where do you go to see a professional level lecture recital? And then there's this issue of writing the proposal, which for some people is very easy because the literature lends itself to such things, and for others it's more of a challenge. Okay, so if you take 2 papers each, and please come in, find a seat. There are plenty of seats over on this side. So what makes it so difficult is that the recital, first of all, has to be an authentic recital, has to be an adjudicatable recital that features you as the recitalist in some fashion. If you had like 100 people on stage and you were in the back and you played a couple of notes, that really wouldn't be something that adjudicators could come to and say, this is your recital. And maybe an event you've organized, but it's not a recital that your playing can be evaluated on. So it has to be an actual recital. And the time frame generally is 30 minutes for recital and 30 minutes for lecture. And they should be balanced and well suited to one another. So the first part is the recital. You have to have really convincing timings for the recital, and you have to have a program that makes sense as a program, which means if you're going to have a lecture recital, they have to be pieces that somehow go together in terms of a lecture topic. We'll talk about that in a moment. But you can already see the challenge in this. Putting together a recital program that lends itself to a lecture recital program is different from just putting together the kind of normal varied program that one would do as a normal recital event. You play a little of this, a little of that, and a little something else, and that's a program. But here, it has to have some sort of topicality that holds the thing together. Okay, you need 2 copies of lecture recitals. Okay, please, they're in the back. Okay.
There are no more.
There are no more, so we have more than 30. So please have a seat, look on with somebody, if you would. Okay, so like I say, for some instrumentalists with a recital literature that's vast and varied, that's great. Other recitalists who may have more limited solo repertoire becomes more of a challenge, and it becomes something that you have to work out with your advisor to think, what's a really good program that will be interesting to others, that will be informative, that will be educational, and be adjudicatable, that will allow faculty members to adjudicate your performance. Very important. So, a recital that has credible timings and a meaningful program that lends itself to lecture discussion. Okay, so far so good. Are there questions about this? It's not easy to come up with. Yes, please.
So what's the leeway in terms of how long? So 30 minutes approximately, is 5 minutes less or more okay for the program?
Yeah, but probably no more than that.
Okay.
Probably no more than that. We want to, and also think in terms of this, that there's stage set up, so you don't want to include that. Playing time, we really want to think in terms of playing time, something that approaches 30 minutes. We've gotten proposals for people proposing 15 minutes, for 18 minutes, and you look at it and say, it's just not enough playing to make an adjudication here, to say something that's representative of themselves, and the program also. So really something very close to 30 minutes. We don't want, because of hall time and other factors, we don't want these events going over an hour, going an hour and a half, going 2 hours, anything like that, because there's a lot, as you can see in this room, there are a lot of people who need to do these lecture recitals, and they have to, we have to have time, we have to keep within the limits. So we don't want to go under the limits, and we don't want to go over the limits. So this is a difficult constraint. How many people have attended lecture recitals of others? Okay, so this is good. So attend lecture recitals, and you'll see, I think that's one of the best educations, what works in a lecture recital and what doesn't work. What's effective, what's not effective. Okay, please come in. Now let's talk about the lecture part. The lecture needs to have a topic. In other words, it needs to be about something, and that topic needs to be researched. So the proposal should come at a time when you have your research well in hand, you have your topic well in hand, you have the recital, when everything is pretty much set in your mind as to what you're planning to do. It's too soon to submit a lecture recital proposal when you think, you just think, well, I'd like to do something like this, and you haven't done any research, you haven't done any practicing, the whole thing is sort of a distant dream. It's not a good time to submit a proposal. Once it's really fleshed out, you have a research proposal, you have an advisor, you've discussed these things, you have whatever you need, other players if needed, you have a program in mind, the whole thing is starting to make sense to you, then that may be the time to submit a proposal which would hopefully be passing, be approvable, or may start a kind of dialogue with the committee as to try to get that proposal to be representative of what should be a very successful lecture recital event. So the committee is there to offer you feedback, to help you rethink weaknesses in the recital program, to make it as strong as possible. It's really a kind of constructive engagement. It's not to say that you've done bad, that you're doing awful work. It's really there to raise the level of things. Okay, so various kinds of topics and lectures come through, and let me just give you an idea of what some of those are. We have a number of these that represent kind of performerly research. Sometimes people want to do recent compositions, and that may involve, some people want to do is a composer interview. These are sometimes effective, they're sometimes not so effective. Just because you have interview, the composer might tell you what the composer wants to tell you, it may not tell you what you want to know necessarily. Interviews are very difficult. If you're thinking of proposing such a thing, I don't know, is anybody thinking of proposing such a thing? Interviewing, having an interview subject? Your proposal should include all the interview questions. And when you do the interview, if you're doing an interview, you need to have a transcript of the interview. Everything said in that interview needs to be transcribed, written down. Right? That makes it an official research interview. So I just mentioned that because in recent years, things like that have come along. Sometimes people investigate different editions of the same composition, right? Compare editions. I think it's a reasonable thing. Sometimes you can get good mileage out of that. Yes, please.
So I have a question about the interview. So when you said you have to list all the questions and then the answers, does that count into the 15-page, or it's just like a compartment for the whole?
I'm not sure what you mean by 15-page, but the interview questions, your whole interview that you plan to do needs to be part of your proposal. All those interview questions need to be stated, and they need to be shown to have a coherent, I should use my other hand because I'm blocking the camera, they need to show that there's a coherent line of questioning, a line of inquiry that you're addressing to this composer. Just asking questions willy-nilly will not yield a good research interview. Once that's approved, when you actually do the interview, when you actually do the interview, you need to make a transcript of the interview. All the questions and all the answers, word for word transcribed. We'll have to have the thing recorded to do that in order for it to be a legitimate research interview.
And when you say recorded, it's like the sound recording?
Yeah, sound recording, an audio recording, and then transcribe it onto paper.
Oh, okay.
Right? So those are the steps. This is described in a very important document, which I hope all of you have read, is the Thesis Committee FAQs, which is under Student Resources. Has everybody seen this? You go to CCM, Student Resources, there it is, Thesis Committee FAQs on the bottom, and there's a thing about interviews. So this is one thing that people have done in recent years. It doesn't look like there are too many people interested in doing that right now, but there's a very important procedure to it if it's going to have any kind of resonance as a true research interview. As I was going on to say, some people do comparisons of editions or score study manuscripts, notational type things. These are also possible ways of investigating and creating a discussion for lecture recital, because ultimately you have to establish the score and why you've made certain choices based on this or that edition that can lend itself to an interesting discussion. Some people have proposed demonstrations. I think these tend to be kind of weaker lecture recital proposals, but taking a kind of work or set of works that has either extended techniques or has some very special technical difficulties, and then doing a lecture recital of demonstrating how you do these things, which could be interesting, but it's not necessarily a research proposal per se. You're not doing research, you're just sort of demonstrating your ability to play certain things. So I don't know, for some instruments and some situations it lends itself to that. I don't know, is anybody here thinking of doing such a topic where basically you're just demonstrating how certain techniques are executed on your instrument? Okay, that's good, actually, that's good. I'm not sure that makes the most rewarding kind of lecture. Some people propose things that are analytical, that are kind of theory-oriented. If you're going to do such a thing, then you just can't say that you're simply going to analyze a piece. It's good to have musical examples. It's good to have a full discussion of the kind of analysis you plan to do and what that analysis will yield in order to answer questions you have about how this piece should be performed. To make it go with the recital part, right? What you learn from the analysis that's now helping you with your recital. Or one can do just simply a kind of abstract analysis. That's also possible. I'm just wondering if there's anybody here planning to do such a topic as that, kind of straight analytical, right? Any questions about it?
Actually, I was wondering, as far as comparing two pieces of the same genre, as what I was going to do, how would you go about, doing would the committee want to see a full analysis of both pieces, or just the important aspects of comparing and contrasting of the works?
Right, so really the proposal is to show what you propose to do and to justify why you propose to do it. And I think a couple of examples of what you plan to do with this and that piece should be sufficient to show that you're working on something that's yielding results,
okay,
that's getting some answers for you, that's leading you to a discussion or deeper understanding of both pieces and the comparison that follows. That's engaging. I think simply, in other words, writing Roman numerals under something may not provide that kind of information. I think we're at a new stage here when we're doing doctoral level research. But that's an interesting kind of topic, and both pieces would be on the recital.
Yeah.
So that sort of thing can have real potential. The question is the analysis meaningful? A lot of people put excerpts without any kind of analytical information about the excerpts, and that generally tends to be sent back. He says, so what about these excerpts? What is it you're trying to say with these excerpts? Ultimately, these lectures are educational. They're opportunities for you to do teaching, and so we want to see some kind of evidence in the recital proposal of the kind of education you want to provide, what you want everybody to learn from this lecture recital event. Okay, so that's quite important. So that's the analytical. Some people plan to do kind of historical type topics. In other words, take a piece, put it in some kind of historical context, give the, a great deal of background about the situation or the circumstances under which a work was composed, what the functionality of the work was meant to be, what the context it was performed in, and so forth. There are people planning to do something like that, something that would be kind of musicological in its orientation. Yes?
Sorry.
So, are there questions about that? Anything I can elaborate on that? No, well, think of if questions come to mind about that. Then there are, I guess, aesthetic kinds of topics. And let me just mention, just sort of a plug, that in music theory you offer a course called Introduction to Aesthetics, which has, over the years, been a very good sort of ground for developing lecture recital topics, even DMA document type topics. So it's going to be offered next fall, I think. So that maybe, unless you plan to do the lecture recital this year, which many of you probably are, you might consider working a topic up in aesthetics. But what kind of issues are we talking about there? One type of topic would be about interpretation. You're there to give a recital, you're there to act as the interpreter. It's always very interesting to know how you came up with your interpretation for a particular performance. What were the interpretive issues or challenges that you confronted with a particular score? This is always of interest, and I think very much tied into a successful lecture recital event. Some people like to talk about recordings, and let me mention this about recordings. You're there to give a lecture and a recital, but not to play recordings. And so proposals that suggest a lecture where you're playing about 20 minutes of recorded material are generally sent back, because we're coming here to hear you speak. We're not really coming to hear a bunch of recordings and that sort of thing. So if there's any kind of recorded material, really minimal. 2 minutes, 3 minutes maximum. I think generally we want to keep that sort of thing to a minimum. You can certainly talk about recordings or talk about interpretations. What does this artist do in this situation? What does that artist do in that situation? But to stand up and play YouTube recordings is really not gonna fly. Yes, please.
In terms of how it's structured, does it matter if the performance is first versus the lecture? Can it be interspersed?
Okay, so that's a good question about how it's organized. However you wish to have it organized, you need to make an argument, a compelling case for why you want to have it organized one way or another. I could see that some people just for the performance might want to get the performance done and then talk about it, or vice versa. Doing it in an interspersed way tends to be a little cumbersome and tends to throw things into a longer time span. So because of setup changes and orientation changes, I think that's probably the weakest one, unfortunately, unless it's incredibly well rehearsed. I think that might be the most challenging kind of format.
Well, I have 2 song cycles that I'm going to be doing, so I think the audience will forget what I said about that second song cycle by the time we get there. So I wanted to talk about one, perform it, talk about the second one, and perform.
Okay. So if you're talking about something substantial, I think you can make a compelling case for organizing it in that way. What I was saying more is where people play for 2 minutes and then they talk and then back and forth, it's back and forth, back and forth. But if you're going to do something really substantial, then I think that might have a better chance of success. But again, everything about the proposal is your argument for why you think it should be done in a particular way. Your proposal is your argument and justification in one sense, and then it's also there to show your command and mastery of your topic in another sense. Okay, some people make arrangements of pieces, sort of various kinds of reductions, and you know, take a big orchestral piece and then arrange it for a small chamber ensemble. That sort of thing is done. And that can be a topic of discussion as well, why you choose a particular ensemble, why you make it in such a configuration, what were the challenges, what's the sort of the research work that went into sort of justifying an arrangement such kind. Does anybody have a kind of proposal that involves arrangements or re-instrumentations or anything like that? Nobody here. Okay. Singers, and I guess this should apply, often like to talk about text and music situations, and actually lots of people can be involved in text and music situations, whether the prose or poem is sung or not. But these, again, need to be worked out quite carefully. Certain elements seem to be neglected, like prosody, how the words and the music sort of go together. That's certainly an issue that one should speak about. The meaning of the poems, the critical literature about the poetry, these are things that should come, I think, in the topic. Very often we get proposals that are about words and music where the discussion sort of devolves into a very kind of weak discussion of word painting, like here's a psi motive and here's a this motive, and it's kind of turns into really nothing much of substance, nothing really doctoral level, nothing that shows research and thought and interpretive and critical thinking. So, so that's a special challenge, really. If you're dealing with text, you want to deal with text in a very sophisticated way. Yes, please.
Actually, well, I just want to backtrack to your previous question. I'm not doing a lecture this year, but I probably will next year. And I am considering maybe doing arrangements. It'd be kind of in conjunction with my ethnomusicology cognate, so music from a different style, you know, in a different part of the world applied to my instrument. And in those techniques also, I was wondering if maybe you had anything to say about proposing arrangements like that.
I don't know if I do have anything to say about it, but I should say it's not uncommon that people from all sorts of, let's say, geographical or musical or whatever kinds of perspectives, they want to talk about something that's personal. Mm-hmm. And so that too has to be researched and worked out and argued for carefully. So I really can't speak further than that.
Sure. I was wondering if there was any pitfalls with that kind of a presentation on arrangements or something that.
On arrangements, I not necessarily, but I mean it's something that has to be argued for and explained, and it can't be taken for granted that that we're doing this arrangement and
there's a case for why it's a legitimate. There has to be a case for why it's a legitimate arrangement. Right.
It's about making the case for why this makes sense.
Okay.
And are there other cases where other arrangements have been done similarly? I don't know, but are you doing something that somebody else has done differently? Or again, it's guesswork. But I wouldn't discourage it. I wouldn't discourage it. But if you have the sense that the idea is to make a case for it, that's, I think, the idea.
Okay.
That's the idea. A real explanatory case. Okay. That said, lecture recital proposals have to have all the elements that all other kinds of research proposals have, and those are laid out in the thesis committee FAQs. So I hope all of you have at least access to the two papers that I put out for you to pick up. One is somewhat longer, one is somewhat shorter. I hope you don't recognize either of these by title. because I tried to choose ones that were recent, but yet would probably be anonymous to this group. One of these proposals passed, and one of these proposals was sent back for a revise and resubmit. And I wonder if anybody has any guesses as to which one was which. Yeah.
I think the shorter one was accepted. The other one is it seems like it's the actual lecture rather than a description of what you're
No,
proposing.
it's just the opposite.
Really? Okay.
Yes. The shorter one was sent back.
Okay.
Okay, so let's take a look at some of the elements. And I think on page 4, statement of purpose. This is basically the part of the proposal where you say what the topic is and why it's important. Right? Both of those are important to say. Identify the topic. In other words, what is this lecture about? The aboutness of the lecture needs to be explained and argued for and justified carefully. And then you want to say something about why it's important. So let's take a look at the text here. Let me just put it up on the screen. Okay, it's brief, so I'll take the liberty of reading it. At this point in time, it's a bit of a cliche. At this point in time, the research done on Samuel Zimon's music has been about his solo repertoire rather than his chamber music. Zimon's woodwind quintet has not yet been professionally recorded or published on, and therefore is unknown to most musicians. This lecture recital document will provide a place where woodwind players and anyone else interested in Samuel Zimon's music can go to learn about his woodwind quintet. It will analyze the form and stylistic content of the work, as well as show the need for new music to become part of the repertoire for the woodwind quintet genre. It is my hope that this research will increase the awareness and popularity of Zimon's chamber music and encourage others to perform and study his works. So, there you have it. What do you see as the strength of this statement of purpose? Let's talk about strengths and weaknesses. Do you find any strengths in this statement of purpose? Yeah, please.
Well, he's looking at something that's not published, that no one's done any work on it, and it's a relatively unknown piece, so it would be a new niche for this person to research and present on.
Right, so it's a little tricky because probably there's not a lot of research to draw on. So you're already putting yourself in a little bit of a difficult situation if you're choosing something where the research is negligible. So that's, I think you're right, it's a strength, choosing something that's not been done again and again and again. You're choosing something novel, something perhaps interesting, perhaps, but but again, you're making a little sacrifice in terms of the kinds of research things that are available. There are ways around this, but if one is just going to talk about the composer and the details of this piece, you're going to be stuck. So you have to think of another way sort of around this. Anything else about the strengths of this statement of purpose? Yeah. Nothing. What about the weaknesses of this thing? Please.
Well, some of the wording, like "it is my hope," is not very strong, and then it says I will analyze the form and stylistic context, but doesn't say anything about how.
Yes, or why.
How or why? Yes.
Right. So, pardon?
Maybe too subjective in general.
Yes, it's very subjective, very, very general. And does it say what? Well, I guess to some extent, it does say what she hopes to accomplish with this. But, in terms of what she wants she or he, I shouldn't say, she or he wants to accomplish with this lecture recital, in terms of what the lesson is. People walking out of this lecture recital have learned A, B, C, and D from me. What would those things be? They're not really stated at all, right? They're sort of left very, very vague. So, just to look at it sentence by sentence, at this point in time, the research done, and the music has been about the solo repertoire. So do we know anything, does learning about the solo repertoire help us learn about the chamber music repertoire? It's an actual question, which doesn't answer that. Simon's woodwind quintet has not yet been professionally recorded or published. It's unknown, okay? The lecture recital document will provide a place where woodwind players and anyone else interested can go to learn about his woodwind quintet. Learn what about his woodwind quintet, right? Learn what exactly, and why are they even interested in it? There's nothing here to get us interested about this quintet other than it's not recorded and not known. But why should we even care about it yet? The purpose here is to get us to care about why this is important, and the writer is not helping us here. And then, as we said a moment ago, it will analyze the form and stylistic content. It's very vague. What tools do we have to use that will help us with this? Or what analytic problems does this pose that we need certain tools or concepts to get into an analysis of this? What are her analytical, or his or her analytic questions, excuse me, on this? Don't know. Don't know. These are unstated. So it's a very shallow statement of purpose. It seems that this person hasn't really worked out the topic yet. The topic, the aboutness, the what's going to happen in this lecture recital. What are the components? What are we going to learn, I guess, is the bottom line. Let's take a look at the other paper. The other paper is longer, and let me just say that length is not necessarily a virtue. Long, boring proposals are really very fatiguing for the committee. They are exhausting to read. You're reading and it's like, didn't I see this already? It just comes back around and around. So length is no virtue, but this one happens to have really rich content. So let's take a look at this one for a moment. Freeze. Sorry, I'm not just using this one projector here. There we go, that's the one. Okay. Can I ask somebody with a good voice to read a little bit of this? Okay, I'll read it. I'm getting over a cold, so my voice is a little wrecked. The Capriccio for piano, brass ensemble by Leos Janáček is unequivocally unique. Just a note, minimize your use of adverbs. Adverbs really just make everything longer. Unequivocally unique. It's enough to say that it's unique. In the very least, because of its bizarre instrumentation. So he goes on about the bizarre instrumentation rule. Musically, it's also unique, yet there is disagreement about the source of this individuality. The prevailing opinion among music critics writing for a general audience is that the Capriccio is exemplary of Janáček's highly personal style in how larger structures are built from repetitive short blocks, the melodies and rhythms are folk-like, etc. This opinion could be problematic, though. It is not a stretch to imagine that the opinion's sources found it easier and more illustrative to impose Janáček's general style upon the piece instead of performing a thorough analysis of it. So already you see the beginnings of a topic, of a controversy. This is the prevailing opinion on this piece. I'm going to challenge it. I think there's another way into this piece. Okay, and I'm going to turn the page without going to this. He says, as I alluded before, there are no substantial analyses of the Capriccio to validate one of these two opposing views. Most Janáček scholars include only superficial descriptions of the work. And he talks about Hollanders and so forth. He says, after analyzing the work and placing my findings in the context of a widely accepted understanding of Janáček's late style, I will argue, it's about something, he's going to make this argument, it's about this argument that the folkloristic element is not absent in the Capriccio, rather it is one of the driving forces behind it. My lecture recital will begin with a brief overview of the historical background and summary of its status. I will then discuss Janáček's interest in and exposure to Czech folk music, outline the characteristics of Czech folk music, And then I will shift to my presentation of the Capriccio and will summarize the work's form before pinpointing the specific folk elements that appear within it. Following this will be my performance of the Capriccio, aided by a second pianist to approximate the attended brass ensemble. So already we see something that has elements. I'm going to learn something. Now, I'm not saying this is perfect, but I'm saying this is more on the mark. I get a feeling that when I read this, I know what I'm going to come away with this recital. I'm going to get a broad view of the historical or the critical opinions of this work by Janacek. I'm going to get an idea of analytic perspectives, and I'm going to come away with a new sense of the folkloristic elements in this. So I'm going to get a full sense of what the literature says currently, and I'm going to get new insights. And now I'm going to read the rest of the proposal to find out what all that's going to be about. And as we can see, it goes into a lengthy background. Again, this is maybe a little too long, but this particular student was somebody who worked at quite a high level. Really one of our best students. So I'm not going to pursue this right now. I think I'd like to go back to our other recital proposal and go through it a little bit more. On page 4, something about including an errata list and discussing the difficulties a group will encounter when rehearsing and performing the woodwind quintet. There are a couple of examples concerning that. So that looks like something that can be cultivated, something that can be developed. Then we get to the methodology. I think page 6 it's always a challenge in research to write about one's methodology. In other words, how are you going to go about doing what you're going to do, and why are you doing it in the way you're going to be doing it? In other words, what are you going to be spending your time doing when you're working on this project? The author writes on the bottom of page 6, I will provide an analysis of the harmonic language and formal structure of Simon's woodwind quintet. Okay, so we hope we'll get some more information about that. Simon's compositions are difficult to label with traditional chord names. Instead, it's best to analyze the quintet by labeling tonal centers rather than chord names. Boy, I'd like to see an example right now. A little example that shows what it means, how the sense of tonal centers is being indicated to this person. We do have this concept of tonal centricity, which can be developed in the statement of purpose. Or even mentioned the statement of purpose, that's one of the elements, that this is going to be about. And to that end, he uses open fifths to create an uncertainty as whether the instruments are playing in a major or minor mode. Why is this a question? I'm not exactly sure. Creating even more tonal ambiguity, there are large sections of the work that are based on the octatonic scale. Okay, so let's find out what that's about. It would be nice to see an example of this. The octatonic scale is symmetrical, yes, providing no tonal center to the performer or listener, or possibly multiple tonal centers. There are also many sections of the work that employ the Phrygian mode, which Simon says is his favorite. Sounds a little silly, actually, to say that, but it is not necessary to use set theory to analyze the entire work, but there is one unique chord, 0146, that reappears at crucial points in the form throughout the first movement. Why is this important? What makes a crucial, how do I recognize a crucial moment in Simon's composition? The intervals that make up this chord appear melodically at other points in the work, and the outer interval of a tritone once again contributes to the tonally ambiguous nature of the piece. Okay, so Simon's formal structures can be analyzed as greatly expanded traditional forms. For example, the first movement is in a sonata form, but with an expanded three-part exposition following an introduction. It would be nice to understand what is meant by that. There are cadenza-like sections that end the exposition and the development. The development expands two of the three melodic themes from the exposition, as well as introducing one new melodic idea based on the octatonic scale. Now it's becoming a little bit of a kind of blow-by-blow description of the piece, and we're not quite being told the methodology anymore. I feel like we've lost the grip on methodology and just getting kind of a blow-by-blow description, which we want to avoid. Then we go to literature review. Literature review is best to sort of precede the methodology generally, but here it is. And the literature review should include, you know, all the things that are in the bibliography. Well, let me put it another way, a little more sensibly. It should address the literature. What are we learning from this literature on this particular composition or composer? What are the concepts that people use when talking about this composer? How are we going to apply those concepts when we actually write our lecture? Do you understand what I mean? So the literature talks about people or compositions in some particular way. It says, like, what's a concept about, let's choose a composer like Bach. What's a concept that you hear frequently about Bach? That his music is contrapuntal. Okay. So contrapuntal. So what are the concepts you'd want to think in the literature? What are the concepts when people are talking about contrapuntal textures and whatnot? What are the concepts that people use when talking about Bach? And then are we going to use those concepts when we make our lecture about Bach? Or say Bach is a kind of universalist. That's something that people say, that all the European styles Bach had at his disposal. Is that something we're going to import from the literature and we're going to apply that ourselves? So we want to know from the literature, what are the concepts that we are going to bring to our discussion? What are we learning from the literature that we're going to adopt and say, yes, this is a good way of thinking about Bach or whoever, or we're going to challenge it. We're going to say, people have been thinking these words. I have questions about this. I'm going to submit this to question. So there are two approaches, but the literature review is to bring up the concepts in the literature, what we know, what's the discourse, in other words, about this particular topic. What is the discourse about this particular topic? And, you know, how am I going to contribute to this discourse? How am I going to engage this discourse? You understand? Is this clear? Are there questions about it? Okay. Well, we can come back to this if you like. So let's take a look at how this literature review is written. Samuel Ziman is a currently active composer, and consequently not enough years have elapsed for a huge amount of research to have been done on his works. That doesn't matter. If the topics are octatonic scales, if the topic is tonal centricity, the literature should have literature about those concepts, right? Because that's going to be the subject. So it's not just about the composer, it's not just about the work. The literature needs to engage your methodological elements, right? Those can be the subject of the literature review if the subject or composition, if there's not enough literature there. There's literature in all sorts of things, so you have to dig. You have to think about the angles here. The research on his compositions is all very recent and is expanding greatly. Ziman's flute music is among his most popular and has been written about the most extensively. Kimberly McCool Rissinger, I imagine, published a performance guide for the sonata for flute and piano, which offers an excellent introduction to Ziman's compositional style and the structure of his forms. What did we learn from this? Why is this an excellent introduction? What do we learn from this introduction? Saying that it's excellent, saying it's good or bad is really useless, right? As you can see here. We don't get anything from that. Just saying it's excellent, I don't even know whether the person read it or not. It doesn't give me any sense that the person has any kind of command or mastery or engagement with this work, just by saying it's an excellent work. In 2000, Mary Siegel published a dissertation about the sonata for flute and piano and the concerto for flute and small orchestra. Dr. Siegel provides interviews with the composer and the flutist who commissioned the works, a discussion of the compositional influences, and formal analysis of the works. Okay, but what did you learn from it that is going to help you with this lecture? What are the concepts that are raised or the things that the composer said, that become things that you want to build on for your lecture. Doesn't say that. A similar, though less extensive article was published about Simon's Sonata and Concerto for Classical Guitar. There are multiple biographies of Simon online through his publisher, his employer, and Oxford Music Online. There have been many reviews, most of which are not significant enough to merit discussion here. However, a New York Times review of a concert of his new music, particularly the Quintet for Strings, Winds and Piano, offers valuable insight into the initial reception of his works. What was the valuable insight? I wish I knew. We wish we knew. It doesn't say. It just says that it was valuable. This was valuable, this was excellent, this was good. It's not a literature review. It's not telling us what you're learning from the literature. It's not showing us that you have command of the literature. It's just showing us that you like it or you don't like it. And that's not really doctoral level work, is it? I hope we agree on this. Okay? So I think if you look at this, I think you'll see that it's a proposal that has potential. There's some things that show that the writer can build on it, and it was the committee's job to help the proposer, to draw the students' attention to things. You can build on this, you can build on that. You can turn this into a proposal by elaborating, by digging, by trying more things. And ultimately, I believe we had some success. But unfortunately, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 goes at this to make the proposal viable, to make the argument convincing, which is very inefficient. And so, but I mean, it's sort of what we're stuck with. So it's good to read these letters from the committee very, very carefully and think carefully. How can I build on what's there in my proposal? If we could turn back to the larger proposal for a moment. Take a look at maybe page 20, for example. The example 12 in this also, raises the issue of octatonicism in the music. But here there's a musical example that really illustrates the octatonic elements. It calls our attention to them. It shows the different harmonic motives. It shows the motives in the bass. It shows how set theory, which is being applied to the analysis of this piece, is actually getting some results. It's pointing, it's showing us some things. It's teaching us some things about the musical texture. So when you're proposing analysis, it's good to have an example like this that shows how your analysis is going to work in practice. It's actually going to do something but show that your methodology, your analytical methodology is already bearing fruit. You have something to show for it. This is the sort of thing I'm learning from it. And that's meaningful. And I had another thought that I was going to say while I was looking at this. And, yes. So this is, I think, even more to the point. The student who did this Janicek proposal had taken the set theory course, had a lot of course background to actually work on this topic very effectively. The student's academic record showed a number of courses in 20th century music, so working on 20th century music was very appropriate. It's a good idea to choose a topic in which you have some background, in which you have some training, and not to choose a topic in an area that you have no training and no background in. I know that comes as I've mentioned this before in these talks, and that comes as a startling idea to some people. But it really is a good idea to think about what courses have I taken, what do I know how to do, and how do I apply that. So if you've taken only 20th century courses at CCM, And then you decide, I'm going to do my lecture recital on Gregorian chant, in which I have no background. That's a possible problem, because you just don't have the background for it. Likewise, if you've done all your coursework in some narrow area and you decide you want to do lecture recital research in some area that you have no coursework background at all, you're asking for, you're making the burden much harder on yourself, right? So there are probably courses, even if you have a wild topic in mind, there's probably some course in CCM that can provide you the kind of background you need for that topic. And like, you build really good buildings on a strong foundation. And if there's no foundation, things can be very wobbly and very, very precarious. So I really urge you to think about what you have a foundation in, what you have tools to do, what you have know-how in and experience in, and maybe choose a lecture recital topic that is, reflective of things that you're good at, or you have training in, and maybe not to go for something as tempting as it may be that you have no background in, and that you just start building from the ground up. These degrees, we're looking for you to develop command and mastery of your area, and not to, and it's good to expand. If you have the resources with which to expand into something and extend a foundation, that's great. But to sort of go in an area where you have like nothing under your feet, that's a difficult situation. And the proposals that are like that come off sounding very unprepared and very amateurish, very, very weak, and it's hard to remedy that. It's really hard to send it back to you, and suddenly you have huge background where none existed before. That's tough. Okay, let's have questions, please.
So, in the actual lecture recital, are you speaking with bullet points, like on a PowerPoint? Are you reading the paper? How is that?
Okay, so let's talk about that for a minute. So first of all, at least 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks before, you'll need to provide your committee with everything you're going to present. In other words, a written out paper version. If you have a PowerPoint, they need to see the PowerPoint, right? But it should be written out, and if anything else ancillary to it, like a PowerPoint or Keynote or whatever, needs to be seen by the committee. In other words, it should be set in stone, nothing left to chance 2 weeks before. How you present, that's a slightly different matter. Many people might want to present with PowerPoint, and it might not be best to sort of stand there and read a paper. You might want to lecture from note cards that have all the same elements as the paper. It might be more efficient, but that has a lot of rehearsal. You have to do a lot of rehearsal to make that effective. So it's a little bit depending on how you manage things. But it's a very careful decision to make. It generally works best, I think, for most people where they read a paper. But reading a paper requires, just as giving the recital, requires a lot of practice, a lot of rehearsal, a lot of kind of vocal projection, and you have to do it in front of people. You have to really be comfortable doing it. So no matter how you do it, practice. Really, it's a skill in itself. You have to really prepare it very well. You don't want to bring in a lot of people into an auditorium and then just have them suffer through a poorly prepared presentation. It's kind of an ethical responsibility to have it absolutely perfectly prepared. Yes, other questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, if I write my proposal in a theoretical view, then should I exclude all the historical view, or can I include a little bit the historical background about the piece?
In the proposal, you mean?
Yeah, if I write in a theoretical view.
Okay, so Yes, yes, because very often the background portion of the proposal basically needs to put the piece in context. And so that's generally the place, to place it in some kind of historical context. That will be a kind of justification in itself for the kind of theoretical theoretical view you plan to take with the piece. Okay? So the analytic questions, the theoretical perspectives should be a proper match and good fit with your explanation of the historical context of the piece. Okay? They should go together. Yes, please.
So, to follow that question, can any of these types of topics be combined? Like can I do a research on something that both analytical and historical?
Yes, of course, of course. These are not, we're not talking about technocratic, like, slots, it's this or that, but we're looking for something that I think, that in general, I think both proposals, especially the Janacek proposal, attempts to do that, not just be narrow, but actually take in a broad range of considerations that all add up to how you view the piece that you're performing and sort of inform your interpretation of it. So it's never just one thing. I mean, certainly things to focus on, things to call attention to, but it's not meant to be like a narrow technocratic exercise in any sense. Just the opposite. It should really embrace a variety of perspectives and then come to a kind of focal point. What's the question with all this? Remember, a half hour goes very quickly. So it's a real balancing act to set a big table and then say, but this is the gist of it. This is our main issue. This is what we want to think about today. Yes, please.
You said length is not a virtue, but after we examine the two ones, I think length somehow matters as well. And because the longer one definitely has more information and also more things, more detail to represent. So that I would say, is there an ideal length or minimum length that you suggest?
There's a number, I forget exactly what the number is in the FAQs, I think, but 3,500 words, if I remember correctly, would be really the maximum. For a lecture recital, I think it can be done convincingly in fewer than that, but I don't think you want to go, if you're getting to 3,500 words, it's starting to get on the long side. I think you want to question the text. Maybe you're using too many adverbs, maybe there's repetitions, or something like that. But max, outside, I think, check the FAQs, but I think 3,500. There's, being long-winded is no virtue, is really what I mean to say. Yes, please.
If I compare two music, and it's okay to perform just one music, I mean, like one influence from one another music. If I do my topic is like that, it's okay to play just with one music, or do I have to play both?
Okay, so you used the word.
Well, like for example, Ned Moran.
Yes.
If I choose like some influence from Booker Ned Moran music, I'm a pianist, and then if I do like that, do I have to play Booker music and piano music, or is it okay to play just only piano music?
Okay. Yes, it's okay just to play.
Just one.
It should
Focus
be,
on just one music.
Yes. It should be, like I say, a real recital. It depends. If you want to do a solo vocal thing, I mean, you could propose it if you could make an argument for it. You mentioned the word influence. That's always a very difficult thing to discuss and to prove. And influence topics tend to not be so effective for lecture recitals. So, just as a matter of speaking, I sort of sway from that. It may not be influence that you mean exactly. I don't know. I don't know quite what you have in mind enough. But I just be wary of that. Because people attempt that, and it's hard, it's generally a tough case to make in a half-hour time frame. It's generally a tough case to make in general. Yes, other questions? Yes, please.
What are some examples of topics you like that come out of the performance division?
I think this Janacek thing, I thought that was a very successful one. So I mentioned that a little earlier. I said when people talk about, so you're a performer, you're going to play something, you work up an interpretation of the piece. To explain how you came up with that interpretation, what the interpretive issues were with working with a composition, I think that's a very interesting topic, very apropos for a lecture recital, to explain, you know, what it is you're trying to convey with this interpretation, how you came up with it, what were the challenges, how you dealt with issues of notation, what were the maybe issues in the score, questions about phrasing, questions about harmony, is the score correct or is some other edition correct, weighing those kinds of things. I think those are very appropriate issues to discuss for a lecture recital. And then we hear the recital. We know how you came up with the interpretation, then we hear it. I don't think people do enough of that. I find it interesting, but it's, you know, it's up to you. So things that involve that sort of thing, sort of things that are, you know, have an aesthetic or interpretive aspect to it, I think work out well. Please.
You mentioned earlier about like just the aesthetics of recordings and things of that nature, and so I was wondering if you did like a comparison of like recording techniques of a certain piece or that different ensembles use, and then demonstrated those techniques on.
Of how the recording itself was done, like a recording engineering question?
Well, yeah, I guess like that, and how like they were mixed versus like some recordings you listen to have a ton of reverb on them. Some of them are really dry, some are studio, that kind of thing.
Right. So personally, I never trust a recording. I see they're really the product of the engineer more than the musician.
Okay.
I don't, and because of that, I think I would personally think that would be a very difficult topic to pursue. What I thought you were going to say, like historical recordings, going back like to the early 20th century and saying when people recorded Chopin in the 1920s, they did all sorts of embellishments that are not in the score and did, acted very freely and did improvisations. But nowadays people sort of play very strict to the score, and, you know, those kind of considerations about historical styles. That's where I thought you were going, which can be interesting. But talking about the recording technology, and then you play the piece, I'm not quite sure how that would quite go together.
Well,
I don't know that we've had one proposing that,
like that
as such.
I guess what I was thinking was that you, like a lot of times, like something specific that they could get from it is like showing exactly how to do something, and like having a live example of different versions of it. Like it's really easy to do a quick recording with microphone techniques and like show the difference in how they sound, like during actual presentation.
Okay,
Like
so that's a kind of demonstration thing. So
yeah.
Then the research aspect of it comes into question. I'm not sure how that would be. Because primarily we're thinking about these as research presentations, which you're suggesting sounds like a very interesting demonstration.
Okay.
So I think that would be a little bit hard to sell. But I mean, that would be sort of as a kind of ad hoc project. That would be interesting. But I'm not sure it would be quite suitable for as a research topic.
Okay.
Are we done? Thank you very much for your attention. I wish you good luck with the lecture research proposal writing process and all the research. I hope it is a fulfilling experience for you.